You know that moment when someone you trusted completely turns their back on you, when the person you opened your heart to uses your vulnerability as ammunition. Most people crumble, but empaths, they discover something extraordinary in that darkness. Jung spent decades studying this transformation, and what he found challenges everything we think we know about emotional sensitivity. When betrayal strikes an empath, most observers see collapse. They witness the tears, the withdrawal, the apparent fragility. But Jung recognized something deeper happening beneath that surface pain. He documented a pattern that emerged consistently in his therapeutic work. Individuals with heightened emotional sensitivity didn't just recover from betrayal. They underwent a fundamental transformation that actually amplified their power in ways that seemed almost paradoxical. When an empath experiences profound betrayal, their initial response mirrors what we'd expect: overwhelming emotional pain, confusion, sometimes complete disorientation. One patient described it as having their entire internal compass destroyed. Everything they believed about human connection, about trust, about their ability to read people, all of it questioned simultaneously. But here's where Jung's observations get really interesting. He noticed that after this initial devastation, something unexpected began happening. These individuals started developing what he called differentiated perception. Their empathic abilities didn't diminish. They actually became more refined, more discerning, more precise. It's like their emotional antenna went from picking up broad signals to detecting specific frequencies with surgical accuracy. The psychological mechanism behind this transformation relates directly to what Jung termed the integration of the shadow. Before betrayal, many empaths operate with an unconscious assumption that their sensitivity is purely a gift, that their ability to feel deeply and connect readily serves only positive functions. The betrayal forces a confrontation with a darker reality, that openness without discernment becomes vulnerability, that connection without boundaries enables exploitation, that feeling everything means absorbing toxicity along with genuine emotion. What strikes me most is how this realization doesn't make empaths less empathic. Instead, it makes them strategically empathic. They learn to direct their considerable emotional intelligence rather than broadcasting it indiscriminately. One individual Jung worked with described it as learning the difference between being a sponge and being a filter. Both interact with water, but one absorbs everything, while the other allows what serves through and blocks what contaminates. This brings us to a crucial Jungian concept: the distinction between identification and observation. Before betrayal, many empaths identify with every emotional signal they receive. Someone feels sad, they feel sad. Someone radiates anger, they absorb that anger. But betrayal creates what Jung called necessary distance, not emotional coldness or disconnection, but psychological space that allows observation without complete absorption. Jung documented how this distance transforms empathic ability from passive reception to active perception. Instead of automatically merging with another's emotional state, the post-betrayal empath can perceive that state while maintaining their own center. They can recognize manipulation without being manipulated by it. They can sense deception without being deceived by their own desire to see good in everyone. But Jung recognized something even more profound happening during this transformation. The betrayal doesn't just teach empaths to protect themselves, it teaches them about their own capacity for psychological survival. Every empath who's been deeply betrayed reaches a moment where they realize, I felt like this would destroy me, but I'm still here. That realization carries enormous power. The pre-betrayal empath often operates with an unconscious fear. If I fully feel this pain, if I truly absorb this darkness, it will annihilate me. Betrayal forces them to test that fear and discover it was unfounded. They descend into emotional depths they believed would consume them, and they emerge intact. Jung called this process voluntary descent into the unconscious. Though in cases of betrayal, there's nothing voluntary about the initial plunge. But what matters is the discovery empaths make in those depths. They possess far more psychological resilience than they credited themselves with. Their sensitivity, rather than being a source of fragility, becomes evidence of remarkable strength. This survival revelation fundamentally alters an empath's relationship with their own emotional nature. Before betrayal, many empaths carry subtle shame about their sensitivity. They've been told they're too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. But when betrayal proves they can withstand tremendous emotional force without breaking, that shame transforms into recognition of their own durability. Jung observed this transformation, created what he termed psychological sovereignty. Empaths stopped seeking external validation for their perceptions. Before betrayal, when they sensed something off about a person or situation, they'd often override their own intuition if others disagreed. The betrayal becomes irrefutable evidence that their initial sensing was accurate, that they perceived the truth, even when they talked themselves out of trusting it. He described working with someone who possessed remarkable emotional intelligence, but consistently dismissed their own perceptions when they contradicted social consensus. This person would sense dishonesty in someone everyone else trusted, feel danger in situations others deemed safe, recognize toxicity in relationships others called healthy. Each time, they'd override their own knowing in favor of the majority perspective. Then came a betrayal that validated every intuitive warning they'd ignored. Someone they'd felt uncertain about from the beginning revealed themselves to be exactly what the empath had sensed beneath the charming surface. The pain was compounded by the realization of how many internal warnings they'd dismissed, but this painful recognition carried a gift: absolute proof that their empathic perception was more accurate than collective opinion. This is where Jung's concept of psychological types becomes relevant. Empaths typically lead with feeling and intuition, meaning they perceive emotional and energetic information as their primary data source. Before betrayal, many empaths apologize for this, as if their natural processing mode was somehow inferior. After betrayal, they recognize their processing mode as simply different, and in many contexts, more accurate. Now, I need to address something crucial here. This isn't about empaths becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone. The transformation isn't from trust to distrust. It's from unconscious trust to conscious discernment. The pre-betrayal empath often extends trust automatically as a default setting. The post-betrayal empath extends trust deliberately, based on accumulated evidence rather than initial impression. Jung distinguished between what he called naive openness and conscious vulnerability. Naive openness is what many empaths practice before betrayal. They open their hearts without really choosing to, without assessing whether that openness is wise. Conscious vulnerability, by contrast, is deliberate. The empath chooses when, with whom, and to what degree they open themselves, based on whether the person has demonstrated they can be trusted with that opening. This distinction reveals that the post-betrayal empath doesn't become closed or hardened, they become selective. Their capacity for deep connection remains intact. They simply become more intentional about where they invest that capacity. Think of it like a high-performance vehicle. You don't drive at maximum speed all the time. You choose when to accelerate based on conditions. Jung observed that empaths who had integrated their betrayal experience became remarkably effective at creating and maintaining healthy relationships. Why? Because they'd learned to distinguish between genuine connection and emotional manipulation, between authentic presence and performed intimacy, between someone who valued them and someone who valued what they could extract from them. Before betrayal, empaths often confused intensity with intimacy. Someone who came on strong, who seemed to immediately get them, who matched their emotional depth from the first interaction. These people felt like soulmates. But Jung recognized this instant intensity often indicated something else entirely. The other person mirroring the empath's energy back to them, creating an illusion of profound connection while actually revealing nothing genuine about themselves. This recognition transforms how empaths approach connection afterward. Instead of being drawn to immediate intensity, they become curious about consistency. They notice whether someone's energy remains stable over time or shifts dramatically based on what they want. They observe whether the person reveals authentic vulnerability or only performs emotions strategically. Jung termed this reality testing. The empath learns to test their initial perceptions against accumulated evidence, rather than accepting initial impressions as complete truth. It's not that their empathic sensing was wrong, it's that they learn their sensing picks up what's present in the moment, which might be genuine feeling or might be skillful performance. Only time and consistency reveal which. What Jung found particularly fascinating was how this discernment process actually enhanced rather than diminished empathic connection. When empaths stopped absorbing everyone's emotions indiscriminately, they had more energy available for relationships that genuinely nourished them. They could go deeper with fewer people, rather than spreading themselves thin, trying to emotionally support everyone who crossed their path. Betrayal teaches empaths they don't have to process everyone's emotions. They can observe someone's emotional state without taking responsibility for managing or fixing it. They can witness someone's pain without absorbing that pain into their own system. This isn't cold or uncaring. It's recognizing that carrying another's emotional burden doesn't actually help that person process their own experience. It just exhausts the empath. One person Jung worked with described this shift beautifully. Before, I thought empathy meant feeling what others felt. After betrayal, I realized empathy means understanding what others feel while maintaining my own emotional integrity. That distinction between emotional merging and empathic understanding represents one of the most significant transformations Jung documented in empaths post-betrayal. The psychological mechanism behind this shift involves strengthening what Jung called the ego's boundaries. Not in the negative sense of becoming egotistical, but in the structural sense of having a clear sense of where you end and others begin. Many empaths pre-betrayal have highly permeable ego boundaries. They unconsciously merge with others' emotional states because they don't have strong internal differentiation between their feelings and others' feelings. This violation forces empaths to construct stronger boundaries, not walls that block all emotional exchange, but filters that allow healthy connection while preventing exploitation. Jung described these developed boundaries as permeable but selective. They can open and close based on whether the exchange serves growth or enables harm. After betrayal, empaths recognize that withdrawal isn't failure, it's self-preservation. When someone shows through repeated behavior that they are unwilling or unable to engage in healthy relationship, the empath can exit without guilt. They understand that continuing to invest in relationships that don't reciprocate doesn't make them noble or compassionate. It makes them complicit in their own depletion. Consider an empath who, before betrayal, had a friend who consistently took emotional support but never offered it. Every conversation centered on the friend's problems, needs, and dramas. The empath felt drained, but told themselves they were being a good friend, that caring meant being available unconditionally. Then betrayal happens, and the empath suddenly sees the pattern clearly. They recognize they've been participating in a one-sided dynamic, and their participation enabled it to continue. With this recognition comes a choice: continue the pattern or establish different terms of engagement. The post-betrayal empath typically chooses differently. They might tell the friend, "I notice our conversations focus entirely on your life. I need reciprocal sharing if we're going to continue this friendship." Some friends respond to this boundary by stepping up. Others reveal they were never actually interested in mutual relationship. Either way, the empath gains clarity. This clarity represents what Jung called the gift in the wound. Betrayal, while painful, clarifies. It reveals which relationships were genuine and which were extractive. It shows which people valued the empath as a person and which valued them only for what they provided. Jung observed that empaths who integrated their betrayal experience often went through what he termed relational pruning. They released multiple relationships that no longer served growth. From the outside, this might look like the empath becoming isolated, but Jung recognized it as the opposite, the empath clearing space for relationships that actually nourished rather than depleted them. Quality over quantity becomes the guiding principle. The post-betrayal empath would rather have 2 genuine friendships than 20 surface connections. They discover that solitude, rather than being something to fear, can be profoundly restorative after years of constant emotional porousness. Jung called this process individuation, becoming a distinct individual rather than an emotional extension of the collective. For empaths, individuation requires learning to value their own emotional experience as much as they value others' emotional experiences. It means recognizing that their feelings matter, even when those feelings inconvenience others. What I find most powerful about Jung's observations is how he framed this transformation not as empaths becoming less empathic, but as empaths becoming empathic toward themselves for the first time. Before betrayal, many empaths direct all their considerable emotional intelligence outward. They can read others with stunning accuracy, sense others' needs before they're spoken, feel others' pain as if it were their own, but they don't extend this same attunement to their own internal experience. Betrayal forces this inward attention. The pain becomes too acute to ignore. Empaths must turn their sensing inward and ask, what do I actually feel? What do I actually need? What do I actually want? Not what should I feel, not what others expect me to need, but what is genuinely true for me right now. Jung recognized that many empaths have what he called a one-sided personality structure before betrayal. They develop their caring, sensitive, accommodating qualities while repressing their assertive, protective, and discriminating qualities. They can feel empathy, but not express anger. They can sense others' boundaries, but not establish their own. The betrayal activates the repressed qualities. Suddenly, the empath feels rage, not just hurt, but genuine fury at being used, manipulated, violated. These feelings often shock the empath because they contradict their self-image as endlessly patient, understanding, and forgiving. But Jung recognized these feelings as necessary for psychological wholeness. The empath who only gives becomes depleted. The empath who never gets angry becomes a target. Integrating the capacity for anger, distrust, and self-protection doesn't make the empath less empathic. It makes them less vulnerable to exploitation of their empathy. This integration process is what Jung called assimilating the shadow, bringing unconscious, rejected aspects of personality into conscious awareness and finding appropriate channels for their expression. For empaths, the shadow often contains their capacity for saying no, for putting themselves first, for disappointing others. The post-betrayal empath learns to distinguish between kindness and self-abandonment. Kindness flows from a full cup. You genuinely have resources to share and choose to share them. Self-abandonment operates from depletion. You give what you don't have because you fear the consequences of not giving. An empath receives a text from someone who consistently takes their energy. Pre-betrayal, they'd respond immediately, even if exhausted. Post-betrayal, they pause before responding. They check in with themselves. Do I have energy for this right now? Does this person reciprocate the support they're requesting? Based on these answers, they choose whether and how to respond. This conscious choosing represents what Jung called conscious participation in relationship rather than automatic reaction. The empath isn't controlled by their conditioning that says they must always be available. Instead, they consciously choose how, when, and with whom to engage, based on whether that engagement serves mutual growth. Jung noticed that empaths who integrated their betrayal experience didn't become less sensitive. They became more sensitive, but with better filtration. They could still perceive emotional subtleties others missed, still sense energetic dynamics others were blind to, still read people with remarkable accuracy. But now they had the discernment to act on these perceptions appropriately. Jung documented another fascinating shift. They developed what he called psychological immunity to manipulation tactics that had previously controlled them. Before betrayal, empaths could be reliably manipulated through guilt, obligation, and appeals to their caring nature. After betrayal, especially betrayal that employed these exact tactics, empaths recognized manipulation for what it was. This immunity to manipulation represents one of the most significant powers empaths gain through betrayal. They become nearly impossible to gaslight because they've learned to trust their own perception even when others tell them they're wrong, too sensitive, or imagining things. Someone tells an empath post-betrayal, "You're being paranoid, I never said that." Pre-betrayal, the empath might have questioned their memory. Post-betrayal, the empath trusts what they heard, observed, and experienced. If the other person denies it, that denial becomes data about the person's honesty rather than proof the empath was mistaken. Jung termed this shift epistemological sovereignty. Empaths claim authority over their own knowing rather than outsourcing that authority to others. They understand their perception is valid data, even when it contradicts what others claim. What Jung found particularly powerful was how this internal authority transformed empaths' relationship with conflict. Pre-betrayal, many empaths avoid conflict at all costs because they absorb others' anger and distress so intensely. Post-betrayal, empaths recognize that avoiding necessary conflict ensures continued mistreatment. This willingness to engage difficult conversations marks a fundamental power shift. The empath is no longer controlled by their fear of others' negative emotional reactions. They can say what needs saying, do what needs doing, even when they know it will create temporary emotional discomfort. Post-betrayal, the empath addresses issues directly. "When you do X, it crosses my boundaries. I need you to stop." If the person becomes defensive, the empath can remain grounded in their truth rather than immediately backing down to manage the other person's emotions. They understand that someone who respects them will hear this feedback and adjust their behavior. The response to boundary setting becomes diagnostic. People who care about the relationship will work to understand and respect boundaries. People who only cared about what they extracted from the relationship will often end the relationship rather than adjust their behavior. Either way, the empath gains clarity. Jung observed this clarity as one of betrayal's greatest gifts. It forced empaths to see relationships as they actually were rather than as they wished they were. Betrayal shattered these hopeful projections and forced recognition of reality. This reality-based relating transformed how empaths approached all their connections. Instead of falling in love with potential, they evaluated people based on consistent, demonstrated behavior. Instead of making excuses for unreliability, they noticed the pattern and adjusted their expectations accordingly. What I find remarkable about this transformation is how it paradoxically made empaths more rather than less capable of authentic intimacy. By releasing relationships that were never mutual, they created space for relationships that actually were mutual. By refusing to settle for crumbs of connection, they became available for full nourishment. This brings us to what Jung called the ultimate gift empaths discover through betrayal: unshakable self-trust. When you've been betrayed by someone you trusted deeply, when you've questioned everything you thought you knew, and then you rebuild your life based on your own discernment, you discover a foundation that can't be shaken by external validation or rejection. The pre-betrayal empath often sought external confirmation for their worth. They needed others to tell them they were good, valuable, lovable. The post-betrayal empath, who has done the integration work, knows their worth independent of others' recognition. Jung termed this the discovery of the indestructible core, the recognition that beneath all the layers of sensitivity exists something fundamental that can't be broken by betrayal, abandonment, or loss. Finding this core transforms everything. From this foundation, empaths rebuild their lives with intention rather than reaction. They choose relationships consciously, set boundaries clearly, honor their perceptions consistently, and invest their considerable gifts deliberately. The three-part framework Jung developed involves, first, honoring the genuine grief of what was lost while releasing any shame about having been betrayed. Second, excavating the patterns that made exploitation possible, not to blame themselves, but to understand what shifts need to happen internally. Third, consciously choosing new patterns based on this understanding, practicing boundaries, trusting their perceptions, valuing reciprocity. If this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, if you're an empath who's experienced betrayal and you're ready to discover the power waiting on the other side of that pain, don't let this be just another piece of content you consume and forget. 3 actions will amplify this transformation. Share this with another empath who needs to hear it, someone who's struggling with betrayal, someone who's questioning their sensitivity. Comment below about which part of this framework hit home for you, because naming your recognition starts the integration process. Subscribe so you continue receiving this depth of psychological insight. You've been given a roadmap through one of the most challenging psychological transformations an empath faces. You know now that betrayal, while devastating, can become the catalyst for developing powers you wouldn't have discovered through comfort. You understand that your sensitivity isn't your weakness, your lack of discernment about when, how, and with whom to be sensitive was the vulnerability, and that vulnerability is completely correctable. The choice is yours now. Remain in patterns that enable exploitation, or step into the power Jung documented in empaths who've integrated their betrayal and emerged transformed. You're the type who reads to the end, who seeks genuine understanding, who's ready to do the work transformation requires. Share, comment, subscribe, not because I'm asking, but because you recognize this work matters and deserves to reach others who need it.